The year was 1944, and the world was engulfed in the chaos of war. The temperature on this particular day, June 6th, was a chilly 55 degrees Fahrenheit, with a gentle mist hanging low over the English Channel. The smell of saltwater and diesel fuel filled the air, as the Allied forces prepared to embark on the most ambitious military operation in history. D-Day. The sound of seagulls crying overhead and the constant hum of engines roaring to life created an ominous atmosphere, as if the very fate of the world hung in the balance. In a small, cramped briefing room on the USS Augusta, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, stood before a large map of Normandy, addressing his senior officers. The room was dimly lit, with only a few faint rays of sunlight peeking through the portholes, illuminating the determined faces of the men gathered around the table. The air was thick with tension, as the weight of responsibility hung heavy on their shoulders. Eisenhower's voice was calm and resolute as he outlined the final plans for the invasion, his words dripping with conviction and authority. To his right, General Omar Bradley, the commander of the U.S. First Army, nodded intently, his eyes scanning the map, his mind racing with the intricate details of the operation. The smell of tobacco and freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as the officers puffed on their cigars and sipped their coffee, their faces set with determination. On the table, a scattering of ashtrays, empty cups, and dog-eared maps created a cluttered landscape, a testament to the countless hours of planning and preparation that had gone into this moment. As the briefing drew to a close, the officers filed out of the room, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own doubts and fears. Outside, on the deck of the ship, the sound of artillery fire and small arms echoed across the water as the Allied naval forces bombarded the German coastal defenses. The smell of cordite and smoke hung heavy in the air as the USS Augusta shuddered and rattled, her 5-inch guns blazing away at the enemy positions. The M4 Sherman tanks, lined up on the tank deck, their .50 caliber machine guns and 75mm cannons at the ready, seemed to quiver with anticipation, their crews busy making final checks on the equipment. The sound of clanging metal and the roar of engines created a cacophony of noise as the tanks prepared to rumble ashore, their tracks gouging into the steel deck. Nearby, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division, their M1 Garand rifles and M1 carbines slung over their shoulders, stood at the rail, their eyes fixed on the horizon, their faces set with a mix of fear and resolve. The Douglas C-47 Skytrain transport planes, their engines roaring to life, taxied down the runway, preparing to take off, their cargo holds packed with paratroopers and equipment. The sound of their engines created a deafening roar as they lifted off the ground, their wheels retracting with a loud clunk, their propellers biting into the air. The smell of aviation fuel and oil hung heavy over the airfield as the planes banked and turned, heading out to sea, their contrails streaming behind them like ghostly fingers. As the Allied forces gathered off the coast of Normandy, the German defenses, a labyrinthine network of bunkers, pillboxes, and trench lines, stood waiting, their guns and machine guns trained on the sea. The smell of damp earth and concrete filled the air as the German soldiers, their Mauser Kar 98K rifles and MG-42 machine guns at the ready, peered out to sea, their eyes scanning the horizon for the first sign of the enemy. The sound of seagulls crying overhead and the constant hum of the wind created an eerie atmosphere, as if the very land itself was waiting with bated breath for the impending battle. In a small, cramped bunker overlooking the beach, a young German lieutenant, his eyes fixed on the sea, felt a sense of foreboding, as if he knew that the tide of the war was about to turn. The smell of sweat and fear hung heavy in the air as he grasped his binoculars, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of his own breathing, the creaking of the bunker's steel door, and the faint rumble of artillery fire in the distance created a sense of claustrophobia, as if the walls were closing in around him. As the clock ticked down to H-hour, the tension built, the anticipation grew, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The temperature was still a chilly 55 degrees, the smell of salt water and diesel fuel still hung in the air. But now, a sense of urgency had taken hold, a sense that the very course of history was about to be forever altered. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on the most epic drama of the 20th century, the invasion of Normandy. As the battle commenced, the coalition forces, comprising of seasoned veterans from various nations, employed a multi-pronged approach to outmaneuver their adversaries. The initial wave of infantry, divided into 3 battalions, advanced in a triangular formation, with the lead battalion taking point and the other 2 providing flanking support. This tactical disposition allowed the coalition forces to present a broad front, making it difficult for the enemy to concentrate their defensive efforts. The lead battalion, consisting of elite troops, moved swiftly and silently, utilizing the available cover to conceal their approach. They traversed the undulating terrain, exploiting the natural folds in the landscape to remain hidden from enemy observation. As they drew closer to the enemy's position, they split into smaller, more agile units, each comprising of a dozen soldiers. These units then fanned out, assuming a dispersed formation that enabled them to cover a wider area and provide mutual support. Meanwhile, the 2 flanking battalions, comprising of troops with expertise in marksmanship and demolition, moved in tandem, their movements carefully coordinated to coincide with the lead battalion's advance. The left flanking battalion, tasked with securing the high ground, ascended a series of rugged hills, utilizing the available rocky outcroppings and ridges to conceal their ascent. They moved in a staggered column, with each section providing overwatch for the one ahead, as they climbed higher into the treacherous terrain. Conversely, the right flanking battalion, responsible for securing the low ground, advanced through a dense thicket of vegetation, their movements cautious and deliberate. They navigated the dense underbrush, employing their knowledge of the terrain to avoid detection, as they sought to outflank the enemy's position. This battalion was further subdivided into smaller teams, each tasked with clearing specific sectors of the underbrush, and providing cover for the other teams as they moved forward. As the coalition forces converged on the enemy's position, their artillery units, positioned in the rear, commenced a precision bombardment, targeting key enemy strongpoints and command centers. The artillery fire, carefully calibrated to avoid friendly forces, created a curtain of smoke and dust, which further obscured the coalition's advance. This enabled the infantry to close the distance, under the cover of the artillery barrage, and ultimately breach the enemy's perimeters. The enemy, largely composed of conscripts and irregulars, responded to the coalition's advance with a mixture of panic and confusion. Their defensive positions, hastily constructed and poorly reinforced, began to crumble under the weight of the coalition's onslaught. As the enemy's lines wavered, the coalition forces sensed victory within their grasps and pressed their advantage, driving forward with renewed vigor and determination. The lead battalion, now mere meters from the enemy's position, launched a series of swift and decisive assaults, overrunning the enemy's forward defenses and pouring into the breach. The flanking battalions, having secured their respective objectives, joined the fray, attacking the enemy's flanks and rear, and further exacerbating the chaos. The enemy, realizing their position was untenable, began a disorganized retreat, abandoning their equipment and positions as they fled in disorder. Throughout the battle, the coalition forces maintained a high degree of situational awareness, leveraging their advanced communication systems and tactical intelligence to adapt their tactics and respond to emerging threats. This enabled them to stay one step ahead of the enemy, anticipating and countering their opponent's moves, and ultimately achieving a decisive victory. The coalition's air support, comprising of fighter bombers and attack helicopters, played a crucial role in the battle, providing close air support and precision strikes against enemy strongpoints. The air crews, working in close coordination with the ground forces, delivered pinpoint accurate fire, taking out key enemy targets and further weakening their opponent's resolve. As the dust settled, the coalition forces regrouped, consolidating their gains and tending to their wounded. The enemy, having suffered catastrophic losses, lay scattered and defeated, their remnants fleeing in disarray. The coalition's victory, achieved through a combination of superior tactics, training, and technology, marked a significant turning point in the conflict, paving the way for further advances and ultimately the enemy's defeat. The aftermath of the battle saw the coalition forces engaging in a thorough exploitation of the enemy's position, seeking to maximize their gains and capitalize on the momentum achieved. They conducted a meticulous search of the battlefield, seeking to capture or destroy enemy equipment and gather vital intelligence on their opponent's capabilities and intentions. The coalition's engineers and logistics teams, tasked with restoring and maintaining the infrastructure, worked tirelessly to repair damaged roads, bridges, and other critical facilities. This enabled the coalition forces to maintain their tempo, ensuring a steady flow of supplies and reinforcements, and facilitating their continued advance. As the coalition forces paused to regroup and reassess, their commanders conducted a thorough analysis of the battle, seeking to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. This post-battle analysis, facilitated by advanced data analytics or tactical simulations, enabled the coalition to refine their tactics, address vulnerabilities, and develop more effective strategies for future engagements. The coalition's victory, though significant, was not without cost. The battle had exacted a heavy toll, with numerous casualties and significant material losses. However, the coalition's superior training, logistics, and command structure had enabled them to absorb these losses and ultimately emerge victorious. In the days and weeks that followed, the coalition forces continued to push forward, driven by their momentum and determination. They encountered pockets of resistance, but their superior firepower, combined with their tactical prowess, ultimately proved too much for the enemy to handle. As the coalition's advance gathered pace, the enemy's defenses began to crumble, and their grip on the territory slowly began to slip. The coalition's ultimate objective, the capture of the enemy's strategic stronghold, now lay within their grasp. The final battle, impending and inevitable, would prove to be the most challenging and decisive of the campaign. The coalition forces, bolstered by their previous successes, stood ready to face the enemy in a last, desperate bid for victory. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the outcome hung precariously in the balance, as the two opposing forces prepared to clash in a final, apocalyptic struggle. As the armored divisions clashed on the outskirts of the city, cacophony of war erupted in a maelstrom of steel and fire. The M1 Abrams tanks, with their 120mm smoothbore cannons, unleashed a barrage of depleted uranium rounds that tore through the enemy's T-72s like paper. The Abrams, advanced composite armor, comprising a combination of ceramic, metal, and other materials, proved nearly impenetrable to the T-72's 125mm armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds. The T-72s, however, were not without their own strengths, and their 12.7mm NSV machine guns ripped through the Abrams' thinner side armor, causing significant damage to the tank's internal systems. Meanwhile, the supporting infantry units, armed with M4A1 carbines and M249 SAWs, laid down a withering field of fire that cut down any enemy soldiers foolish enough to attempt a frontal assault. The M4A1s, with their 5.56 by 45mm NATO cartridges, proved particularly effective at close range, while the M249s, firing 5.56 by 45mm NATO rounds at a rate of 750 rounds per minute, provided a hail of suppressive fire that pinned down the enemy and prevented them from effectively returning fire. The infantry's advanced combat helmets, equipped with integrated communication systems and ballistic protection, allowed them to coordinate their efforts and stay safe in the midst of the chaos. As the battle raged on, the logistics of war began to play a crucial role. The Abrams' gas-guzzling AGT-1500 turbines, which produced 500 horsepower, were thirsty beasts that required constant resupply. The tanker trucks, laden with JP-8 fuel, wound their way through the battlefield, dodging cratered roads and burning wreckage to reach the front lines. Each Abrams tank consumed an astonishing 252 gallons of fuel per hour, making resupply a critical component of the war effort. The supply chains, stretching back to the distant ports and depots, were the lifeblood of the war machine, and any disruption to these vital arteries could prove disastrous. The aerial support, provided by the AH-64 Apache helicopters, added a new dimension to the battle. Their 30mm M230 chain guns, firing high-explosive rounds at a rate of 200 rounds per minute, tore through the enemy's fortified positions, while their Hellfire missiles, with their advanced infrared seekers, picked off individual targets with surgical precision. The Apache's advanced fire control systems, which integrated data from various sensors and sources, allowed the pilots to engage targets with unparalleled accuracy, even in the midst of the chaotic battlefield. As the sun began to set on the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the carnage, the enemy launched a desperate counterattack. Waves of infantry, supported by RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenades and 82mm mortar fire, surged forward in a human tide. The Abrams tanks, their cannons blazing, cut down the attackers with ease, while the Apaches swooped in to deliver the coup de grace. The M4A1s and M249s, firing in disciplined bursts, prevented the enemy from closing T-Agao within grenade range, keeping them at arm's length as the tanks and helicopters delivered the killing blow. In the midst of the chaos, individual acts of bravery and sacrifice went unrecorded, lost in the overwhelming din of war. A young lieutenant, his M4A1 empty, grabbed a nearby M249 and laid down a withering field of fire, covering his comrades as they fell back to a new defensive line. A tank commander, his Abrams crippled by a lucky RPG hit, directed his crew to abandon ship, even as he remained behind to provide covering fire with the tank's coaxial machine gun. These acts of valor, though unheralded, were the backbone of the war effort, the unseen sinew that held the military machine together as it ground forward, inexorably, toward its objective. As night fell on the battlefield, the fighting slowed to a crawl, the survivors on both sides licking their wounds and regrouping for the next day's battle. The war, a monstrous, sprawling entity, had claimed countless lives, reduced cities to rubble, and shattered the tranquility of a generation. And yet, even as the guns fell silent, the war machine continued to churn, its gears grinding forward, driven by the insatiable hunger for victory, for dominance, for the spoils of war. The next day would bring new battles, new challenges, and new opportunities for heroism and sacrifice, as the great, grinding engine of war continued to devour all in its path. The artillery, which had been pounding the enemy's rear areas all day, continued to fire throughout the night, their 155mm howitzers and 227mm rocket launchers providing a constant, thunderous background noise that made it impossible for the enemy to rest. The artillery's advanced fire control systems, which utilized satellite-guided rounds and precision targeting, allowed them to deliver their munitions with unprecedented accuracy, striking enemy command centers, logistics hubs, and troop concentrations with devastating effect. As the night wore on, the engineers and maintenance crews worked tirelessly to repair and refurbish the damaged equipment, their welding torches and wrenches casting a golden glow over the darkened battlefield. The supply trucks, laden with spare parts, ammunition, and fuel, rumbled forward, their headlights casting an eerie glow over the deserted landscape. The medical teams, their ambulances and aid stations a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos, worked tirelessly to treat the wounded, their skilled hands and compassionate hearts a testament to the enduring power of humanity, even in the darkest depths of war. The war, a complex, multifaceted entity, was a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one representing an individual, a unit, a strategy, or a tactic. It was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a maelstrom of steel and fire that seemed to have a life of its own. And yet, despite its complexity, its chaos, and its cruelty, the war was also a testament to the human spirit, a reflection of our darkest impulses, our greatest fears, and our most profound aspirations. It was a reminder that, even in the midst of unimaginable destruction, there was always hope, always a chance for redemption, always a possibility for peace. As the cacophony of gunfire and screams reached a deafening crescendo, the very fabric of the battlefield seemed to unravel, plunging the combatants into a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of smoke and sweat, the ground slick with the viscous fluid of the wounded and the dead. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath a struggle to stay alive, as the opposing forces clashed in a frenzy of steel and fire. To the north, the entrenched infantry lines were beginning to waver, the defenders, resolve tested by the relentless onslaught of artillery and small arms fire. The earthworks, once a bulwark against the enemy's advances, were now being reduced to rubble, the defenders, bodies torn asunder by the hail of bullets and shrapnel. The screams of the wounded filled the air, a haunting melody that seemed to grow louder with every passing moment, as if the very earth itself was crying out in agony. Amidst this bedlam, a young lieutenant, his face smeared with dirt and blood, rallied his troops with a fierce cry, urging them to hold their ground against the enemy's surging tide. His voice, hoarse from shouting, was almost lost in the din of battle, but his words seemed to galvanize the defenders, who redoubled their efforts, firing their rifles and hurling grenades into the fray with renewed ferocity. The lieutenant, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, led by example, charging forward with a bayonet fixed to his rifle, cutting down anyone who dared stand in his way. As he fought, the lieutenant's mind was a jumble of emotions, his thoughts torn between the fear of death and the need to protect his comrades. He had seen friends and comrades fall around him, their bodies broken and battered, and the memory of their faces haunted him still. Yet, he knew he had to press on, to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The enemy was closest, their guns and grenades mere feet away, and he knew that to hesitate would be to invite disaster. To the south, the enemy's armored columns were making steady gains, their tanks and infantry fighting vehicles pushing deep into the heart of the defensive lines. The defenders, outgunned and outmaneuvered, were being slowly but surely pushed back, their positions overrun by the enemy's relentless advance. The tanks, their cannons blazing, were the spearhead of the attack, crushing all before them, as the infantry followed close behind, mopping up any remaining pockets of resistance. The battlefield was a scene of utter devastation, the ground scorched and blackened, the trees splintered and broken. The air was thick, with the smell of burning oil and rubber, the sound of explosions and screams echoing through the air. It was a vision of hell, a descent into madness and chaos, where the laws of humanity were forgotten, and only the strongest survived. In the midst of this carnage, a lone soldier, his rifle empty, his body battered and bruised, stumbled through the wreckage, searching for a way to escape the slaughter. Here, he had lost his unit, his friends, his sense of purpose, and now he was alone, adrift in a sea of chaos. The soldier's eyes were wild with fear, his heart racing with every step, as he stumbled through the ruins, avoiding the enemy's bullets and bombs. As he walked, the soldier's mind was a blur of memories, his thoughts torn between the past and the present. He remembered his family, his friends, his life before the war, and the memories haunted him still. He thought of the comrades he had lost, the friends he had made, and the enemies he had killed. The soldier's heart was heavy with grief, his spirit crushed by the weight of his experiences. The battle raged on, a seemingly endless cycle of violence and bloodshed, as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of steel and fire. The outcome was far from certain, the outcome hanging precariously in the balance, as the combatants fought on, driven by a mix of fear, adrenaline, and desperation. The earth trembled beneath their feet, the sky grew dark with the smoke of war, and the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, plunging the world into an abyss of chaos and destruction. In this maelstrom of chaos, a small group of soldiers, led by a grizzled sergeant, fought to hold their ground, their rifles and machine guns firing steadily into the enemy's ranks. The sergeant, his face a map of wrinkles and scars, bellowed orders at his troops, urging them to keep firing, to hold their ground against the enemy's surging tide. His voice, like a rock, was a beacon of calm in the midst of the storm, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. As the battle reached its climax, the sergeant's thoughts turned to his family, his wife and children, and the life he had left behind. He wondered if he would ever see them again, if he would ever return home. The sergeant's heart was heavy with emotion, his spirit torn between his duty and his desire to live. He knew that he had to keep fighting, to protect his comrades, to fulfill his duty, but he also knew that the cost of victory might be too high to bear. The enemy was closing in, their guns and grenades mere feet away, and the sergeant knew that the end was near. He steeled himself for the final confrontation, his rifle at the ready, his heart pounding in his chest. The sergeant's eyes locked onto the enemy, his gaze fierce and unyielding, as he prepared to make his last stand. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, but one thing was clear: only one side could emerge victorious, and the sergeant was determined to make sure it was his. As the two forces clashed, the sound of gunfire and explosions reached a deafening crescendo, the earth shaking beneath their feet. Air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the ground slick with the viscous fluid of the wounded and the dead. The sergeant's rifle fired steadily, his bullets ripping into the enemy's ranks, as he fought to hold his ground against the enemy's surging tide. The battle was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. The sergeant's world was reduced to a single, overriding imperative: survival. He fought on, driven by a mix of fear, adrenaline, and desperation, his heart pounding in his chest, his rifle firing steadily into the enemy's ranks. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, but one thing was clear: the sergeant would fight to the end, no matter the cost. In the midst of this chaos, a moment of clarity emerged, a moment of perfect understanding. The sergeant knew that he was not just fighting for his country, or his comrades, but for his very life. He was fighting to survive, to overcome the enemy, to emerge victorious from the battlefield. The sergeant's heart was filled with a sense of purpose, his spirit renewed by the knowledge that he was not alone. As the battle raged on, the sergeant's thoughts turned to the future, to the possibilities that lay beyond the horizon. He wondered what the world would be like after the war, whether humanity would emerge from the ashes, renewed and rejuvenated. The sergeant's heart was heavy with emotion, his spirit torn between his desire for peace and his duty to fight. The enemy was Carrick, losing in, their guns and grenades mere feet away, and the sergeant knew that the end was near. He steeled himself for the final confrontation, his rifle at the ready, his heart pounding in his chest. The sergeant's eyes locked onto the enemy, his gaze fierce and unyielding, as he prepared to make his last stand. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, but one thing was clear. Only one side could emerge victorious, and the sergeant was determined to make sure it was his. In the midst of this chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged, a chance for the sergeant and his comrades to turn the tide of the battle. A group of reinforcements, led by a young officer, was pushing forward, their guns and grenades at the ready. The officer, his face set in a determined expression, led the charge, his voice ringing out across the battlefield, urging his troops to follow him into the fray. The sergeant's heart was filled with a sense of relief, his spirit renewed by the knowledge that he was not alone. He joined the charge, his rifle firing steadily into the enemy's ranks, as he fought to hold his ground against the enemy's surging tide. The battle was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. But the sergeant was no longer alone. Together, the sergeant and the officer led the charge, their troops following close behind. The enemy was pushed back, their lines wavering, as the sergeant and his comrades fought to gain the upper hand. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: the tide was turning, and the sergeant was determined to emerge victorious. As the battle raged on, the sergeant's thoughts turned to the past, to the memories that had brought him to this moment. He remembered his family, his friends, his life before the war, and the memories haunted him still. The sergeant's heart was heavy with grief, his spirit crushed by the weight of his experiences. But even in the midst of this chaos, the sergeant found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. He knew that he was fighting for something greater than himself, something that would outlast the war. The sergeant's heart was filled with a sense of pride, his spirit renewed by the knowledge that he was not alone. The battle was a test of endurance, a trial by fire, but the sergeant was determined to emerge victorious. He fought on, driven by a mix of fear, adrenaline, and desperation, his heart pounding in his chest, his rifle firing steadily into the enemy's ranks. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, but one thing was clear: the sergeant would fight to the end, no matter the cost. And in the end, it was not the enemy that would defeat the sergeant, but his own mortality. The sergeant's body was broken, his spirit crushed by the weight of his experiences. But even in death, the sergeant found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. He knew that he had fought for something greater than himself, something that would outlast the war. The battle was over, war was won. But the sergeant's legacy lived on. He had fought for his country, for his comrades, and for his very life. The sergeant's heart was filled with a sense of pride, his spirit renewed by the knowledge that he was not alone. He had fought to the end, no matter the cost, and in doing so, had found a sense of purpose, a sense of peace. The aftermath of the catastrophic event was a sight to behold, a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of war. The once pristine landscape was now scarred, littered with the remnants of what was left of the opposing forces. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and blood, a noxious odor that clung to every surface like a bad omen. The sounds of gunfire and explosions had given way to an eerie silence, punctuated only by the moans of the wounded and the dying. As the survivors stumbled through the wreckage, they were met with scenes of unimaginable horror. The bodies of the fallen lay strewn about, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their faces frozen in perpetual screams. The ground was slick with blood, making every step a precarious balancing act. Medics and medical personnel scrambled to tend to the wounded, their faces etched with concern and exhaustion. The sheer scale of the disaster was overwhelming, with casualty reports pouring in by the minute. The numbers were staggering, with estimates suggesting that over 50,000 soldiers had been killed or wounded in the battle. The toll on the civilian population was equally devastating, with entire towns and villages reduced to rubble. The infrastructure was in shambles, with roads, bridges, and buildings destroyed or severely damaged. The economic cost of the war was already being felt, with trade and commerce grinding to a halt. Individual stories of survival were beginning to emerge, tales of courage and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. There was the story of Lieutenant James, who had single-handedly held off an entire platoon of enemy soldiers, buying time for his comrades to escape. There was the story of Sergeant Thompson, who had risked life and limb to rescue a group of civilians trapped in a bombed-out building. And there was the story of Private Johnson, who had survived a direct hit on his trench, only to emerge with severe burns and a newfound appreciation for life. As the days turned into weeks, the full extent of the damage began to sink in. The war had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. The survivors were haunted by the memories of what they had seen and experienced, their minds struggling to process the trauma. The civilians were left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild their lives and their communities. The politicians and leaders, who had so callously sent their soldiers to fight and die, were left to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The international community was in an uproar, with condemnations and recriminations flying back and forth. The United Nations held emergency meetings, scrambling to find a way to broker a peace treaty. Diplomats and ambassadors worked tirelessly, trying to find a way to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table. The media was filled with stories of the war, with graphic images and videos spreading like wildfire across the globe. The humanitarian crisis was spiraling out of control, with refugees flooding across borders, seeking safety and shelter. Aid organizations and charities were stretched to the breaking point, struggling to provide food, water, and medical care to the displaced. The world was watching, horrified, as the situation continued to deteriorate. In the midst of all this chaos and destruction, there were glimmers of hope. There were stories of ordinary people who had come together to help those in need. There were tales of soldiers who had laid down their arms and refused to fight, choosing instead to tend to the wounded and protect the innocent. There were accounts of politicians who had finally begun to see the senseless slaughter for what it was, and were working to bring a swift end to the conflict. As the war finally began to subside, the survivors were left to survey the ruins. They were left to ponder the what-ifs, to wonder what could have been done differently. They were left to mourn the loss of their comrades, their friends, and their families. They were left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild their lives, and to find a way to move forward. The question on everyone's mind was, what next? Would the world learn from its mistakes? Or would it continue down the same path, doomed to repeat the errors of the past? Only time would tell. The impact of the war would be felt for generations to come, a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict and the importance of finding peaceful solutions to our problems. The survivors would carry the scars of the war with them for the rest of their lives, a constant reminder of the horrors they had witnessed. The world would never be the same again, changed forever by the events of the war. The memories of the war would linger, a haunting reminder of the devastating cost of conflict and the importance of striving for peace. In the years that followed, the world would slowly begin to rebuild. The survivors would find a way to heal, to move forward, and to rebuild their lives. The politicians and leaders would learn from their mistakes and would work to find new ways to resolve conflicts peacefully. The world would emerge from the darkness of war into a brighter future, one where the horrors of conflict were a distant memory. But for now, the world was left to pick up the pieces, to mourn the loss of life, and to wonder what could have been done differently. The war was finally over, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. As we conclude our examination of the historical event, it is essential to analyze the long-term geopolitical impact it has had on the world. The aftermath of the conflict has led to a significant shift in the global balance of power, with various nations emerging as major players on the international stage. The event has also resulted in the formation of new alliances and the strengthening of existing ones, which has, in turn, led to a complex web of diplomatic relationships. One of the most notable consequences of the conflict has been the rise of new world powers. The event has created opportunities for nations that were previously not considered major players to assert their influence and establish themselves as key actors in global affairs. This shift in power dynamics has led to a more multipolar world, where various nations have a significant impact on international relations. The conflict has also had a profound impact on the global economy. The destruction caused by the war has led to a significant increase in international trade, as nations have sought to rebuild and recover. This, in turn, has resulted in the establishment of new trade agreements and the strengthening of existing ones, which has facilitated the growth of international commerce. Moreover, the event has led to the development of new technologies, which have transformed the way business is conducted and have created new opportunities for economic growth. Furthermore, the conflict has had a lasting impact on international relations, leading to the establishment of new institutions and the strengthening of existing ones. The event has highlighted the need for cooperation and diplomacy in preventing future conflicts, and as a result, Various international organizations have been established to promote peace and stability. These institutions have played a crucial role in shaping global affairs and have helped to create a more stable and secure world. In addition, the conflict has had a profound impact on the social and cultural landscape of the world. The event has led to the displacement of people, the destruction of cultural heritage sites, and the loss of traditional ways of life. However, it has also created opportunities for the exchange of ideas and cultures, leading to a more interconnected and interdependent world. The event has also highlighted the importance of preserving cultural heritage and promoting cultural understanding, which has led to increased efforts to protect and promote cultural diversity. The legacy of the conflict can also be seen in the modern-day military strategies and tactics employed by nations. The event has led to the development of new technologies and the refinement of existing ones, which has transformed the nature of warfare. The conflict has also highlighted the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in preventing future conflicts, and as a result, various international agreements have been established to regulate the use of military force. As we reflect on the historical event, it is clear that it has had a profound and lasting impact on the world. The conflict has led to significant changes in the global balance of power, the international economy, and the social and cultural landscape. It has also highlighted the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in preventing future conflicts, and has led to the establishment of new institutions and the strengthening of existing ones. In conclusion, the historical event has left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the course of human history in profound and lasting ways. As we move forward, it is essential to learn from the past and to recognize the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in promoting peace and stability. By examining the legacy of the conflict, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of international relations and the importance of preserving peace and stability in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. As we consider the complexities of human conflict and the importance of promoting peace and stability, we are reminded of the profound impact that historical events can have on the world. The legacy of the conflict serves as a poignant reminder of the devastating consequences of war and the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in preventing future conflicts. Ultimately, the study of history is not merely an academic exercise, but a vital tool for understanding the complexities of human nature and the importance of promoting peace and stability in an increasingly unpredictable world. And so, as we conclude our examination of the historical event, we are left to ponder the profound implications of human conflict and the importance of promoting peace and stability. We are reminded that the study of history is a vital tool for understanding the complexities of human nature and the importance of cooperation and diplomacy in shaping the course of human events. As the great philosopher George Santayana once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." These words serve as a poignant reminder of the importance of learning from the past and recognizing the significance of historical events in shaping the world we live in today. If you've enjoyed this in-depth analysis of the historical event, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. By exploring the complexities of human conflict and the importance of promoting peace and stability, we can gain a deeper understanding of the world and our place within it. So join us as we continue to examine the intricacies of history and the profound impact that historical events have on the world. Subscribe now and stay up to date on our latest content.